Hey guys, it's Dr. Jansen. Great to see you. And today our lesson is over one-step equations. So let's get started. All right, so this is what I've always told my students. When we are trying to solve for a variable, there are really three things we always have to keep in mind and ask ourselves. And that's how we'll know if we have solved the equation. Is our variable alone? Is it positive? Positive in terms of the sign? And is it on the left side? Now, let me tell you something. The left side thing doesn't really matter. Like if we had 4 equals x, technically that's okay, but really our
symmetric
property says that we can switch that around and make that x equals 4, and that's really no problem. So I always like to put it on the left side. I just think it's a good habit because this is usually like 90% of the time how you're going to see it anyway. So I always just teach my students that if it's written like that to just flip it around. But it's really not the end of the world if you don't. So anyway, so is it alone, positive, on the left side? You always want to say that when you are solving an equation, and you just want to ask yourself that all the way through. Is it alone, positive, on the left side? Is it alone, positive, on the left side? So, okay. So the next thing is that we want to recognize that how are we going to get our equation there? So how are we going to get it alone, positive, on the left side? There is one answer to that question, and that is through the use of inverse operations. Inverse operations, another thing that we are going to say over and over and over. If you don't know what the word inverse means, it just means opposite. Inverse is just doing the opposite of something. So instead of adding, we're going to subtract. Instead of multiplying, we're going to divide. Okay, it's always just doing the opposite operation, the inverse operation. Okay, so there are 4 actual steps to solving one-step equations. The first step is to determine the variable. So we got to find the variable in our equation, because we got to find the variable that we're trying to get alone, positive, on the left side. 2 is we have to determine what the variable's sign is. That one goes with number 2. Is the variable positive or is it negative? We need to know. Is the variable positive or negative? 3. Then we're going to use inverse operations to isolate the variable. Remember, isolate just means alone. So that's going to help us get it alone. Step 1, isolate variable. Okay? And number 4 is we're just going to solve. So let's try an example. It's always easier. I know whenever we write down directions in math, a lot of people's first reaction is like, it's always easier to go through an example. So always write down the directions that your teacher has given you and then just give them a minute, okay? Let them put down an example. Try not to get nervous yet. Try to just take a breath and go, okay, I have my directions. Let's work through this together, okay? So again, alone, positive, on the left side. Is this C? Is it alone? Nope. Is it positive? Yes. It is positive because otherwise there'd be a negative hanging out there, so we know it's positive. Is it on the left side? Yes. But it is not alone, okay? So I have to determine my variable. It is C. The variable sign. Is it positive? Yes. Inverse operation to isolate the variable. So we are asking ourselves, I have to get it alone. How do I get rid of negative 5? It's right here, step 3. Inverse to isolate the variable. So we already did 1, did 2. Inverse to isolate the variable. We can't check off 3 yet. So what's the opposite of minus 5? Add 5. That's going to cancel that out, but if I do it to the left side of my equation, I have to do it to the right to keep it balanced. Add 5, and C equals 7. And is C alone? Yes. Is it positive? Yes. Is it on the left side? Yes. Check. We're done. So C equals 7. Let's look at number 2. 11. Ooh, a little crazy. 11 equals 3 plus W. Oh, sorry, my pen is being a little funny. My stylus. Okay, same thing. First, identify my variable. W. Is it positive? Yes. We see the plus sign in front of there. Is it alone? No, it's hanging out with this 3. Is it on the left side? No, it's not. It's on the right side. Okay, so I got 2 things I got to fix. Let's go through my steps here, okay? So, determine the variable. We already did that. Check. Variable sign. We saw it was positive. That works. Check. Inverse to isolate the variable, okay? We have to get rid of this 3. Well, how do I know what the inverse is? There's nothing in front of here. Remember, if it was negative, there would be a negative. So if there's nothing, it's positive. So what is the opposite of positive, of plus? Minus. That means we're going to minus 3 here. We have to do it to the other side to keep our equation balanced. 11 minus 3 is 8. And again, since those canceled, it's just 8 equals W. Again, you can be done here. Like if you put a box around that, it's not wrong. But I like for my students to build the habit of writing things with their variable on the left side. So it's completely okay to swap those around, because if 8 equals W, then we know W equals 8. And there you go. There's your answer. We're going to do one more. We're going to squeeze it in right here. Number 3, 4 minus x equals 1. Okay? So, x, determine our variable right here. Is it alone? No, it is not. It's hanging out with this 4. Is it positive? No, it's not actually, because it's not just an x, it's a negative x. It has a negative sign in front of it. All numbers are left-handed. I know this looked weird in video. It's opposite, I guess. All left-handed. But this is not a positive x. So it's not positive. It's got a negative. It's a negative x. Is it on the left side? Yes, it is. But it doesn't meet 2 of our requirements. So we determine the variable. It's x. We determine the variable sign, which is negative, which is problematic. We're going to have to fix that. Okay? And we will as we're working out this problem. And now we're going to use inverse operations to isolate the variable. So we have a 4 hanging out over here. Again, it doesn't have a sign. So how do I change that? Again, if there's no sign, you know that means it's actually positive. So the opposite of plus is minus. 4 minus 4 is going to cancel. But if I do minus 4 there, I have to do minus 4 there. So I'm left. I'm going to carry my work down. These cancel. I'm left with negative x. I have to remember to carry that negative as well. It was not just an x. It was a negative x. So I got to carry down the negative. And then 1 minus 4. Okay, if you're great with your integers, you know that that is minus 3. If you're not, you can write your number line. Or you could put this in your calculator. Okay, so now, am I done? I have to ask myself my first 3 questions. That's how I'm going to test it. Is x alone? It is. Is it positive? It is not. It's a negative x. It has to be alone, positive on the left side. It's alone and it's on the left side. There's nothing hanging out over here with it and it's on the left side, but it is not positive, so we are not done, okay? Now, how do I get rid of this negative hanging out with the x? That's a great question, okay? This negative, remember, is really a negative 1. If there's ever not a number there, it's always a 1, always, okay? So it's really negative 1 times x. It's really negative 1 times x. So again, how do I get rid of negative 1 times x? Well, what's the opposite? What's the, again, guys, going back up here, woo, woo, how do we get rid of all this stuff? It's our magical inverse operations. What is the opposite of negative 1 times x? What's the opposite of multiplication? It's division. So if I divide by -1, that will cancel that multiplication, that -1 times x, okay? So if I divide this by -1, I have to divide that by -1 to keep my equation balanced. -1 divided by -3. Again, if you're great with dividing negative numbers, you'll know that that is x equals +3. If you're not, you can go ahead and use your calculator. And that, my friends, is how we add and subtract one-step equations. Great job.